When you undertake a commitment, like a commitment to climb Everest, you've got to really, really think what you're taking on. You really must know the dangers and the problems and the hardships that you're going to face. And you've really got to decide whether or not you really want to do that.
Everest 82, the Canadian Challenge. 5 years ago, some dedicated Canadians began to pursue the dream of all who climb mountains, the ascent of Everest. Their efforts were climaxed by 8 weeks of heroism, tragedy, agony, and then triumph. We will tell you some of the stories about the men who went beyond what most of us can only imagine.
This is dangerous, and if this isn't the kind of game you want to play, if the satisfaction isn't great enough for you, isn't deep enough for you, you shouldn't be here. It's not the place for you.
Mount Everest, the roof of the world. At 29,028 feet above sea level, it is the highest point on Earth. She is known as Shomolungma, goddess mother of the world. Everest is one of the most remote mountains on Earth, on the border between Nepal and Chinese Tibet. Everest is never conquered. Occasionally, it tolerates a momentary success. That moment came for the first time on May 29th, 1953.
This is the BBC Home Service. Here is the news. Mount Everest has been conquered by members of the British expedition. The news reached London in a message to the Times from Colonel H.C.J. Hunt, the expedition's leader. It said that Mr. E.P. Hillary, a New Zealander, and Tenzing Bhutia, a Sherpa, had reached the summit last Friday, May 29th. Message added, all is well.
Since Hillary and Norgay first stood on the top of the world, more than 100 climbers have made it to the summit. Almost that many have died in the attempt. 1978, an Everest permit is granted to Canada by the Nepalese government, and the highest mountain climbed by Canadians at the time was Pamori in Nepal. In the 4 years that followed, every move was carefully plotted to develop big mountain experience and define the logistics of mounting a major expedition. The business manager of the Canadian expedition was John Ament of Canmore, Alberta. He's director of the Banff Wilderness Seminars.
It became very obvious off the start that we needed the support of one major corporate sponsor who would provide the financial underpinning for the entire venture. And we were very fortunate in that regard in finding Air Canada, who were willing to take the risk, who saw the potential in this project, both from a corporate point of view and from a Canadian point of view. And once we had secured their support, it became much more easy for us to raise other funds because we automatically had the credibility of a major national airline behind us. We also had to raise money for training climbs, which was another major project that we had built into the Everest expedition.
The team. Bill March, who would come to believe that camaraderie and laughter are as important as climbing techniques. Lloyd Gallagher, who would descend the steep Lhotse face alone and in the dark after his oxygen failed. Laurie Skreslet, who would fracture 2 ribs repairing the section of the icefall that killed Blair Griffiths. Pat Morrow, who would be the second Canadian to reach the summit. Al Burgess, the best all-round climber who would lose his dream when his oxygen froze just 1,500 feet below the summit. Dwayne Congdon, who would climb without oxygen to deliver the 2 full bottles that put Pat Morrow on the top. Dave Reed, who would dig himself out of a crevasse and then save the life of a Sherpa. Gord Smith, who would get the expedition moving again by being the first to brave the Khumbu icefall after the tragedies. John Ament, who would tell the story to the world by satellite. Rusty Bailey, who would save the lives of 3 men in 2 separate avalanches. Mountain climbers are the most individual of men, but by the very nature of the fearsome challenge they face, they must work selflessly together. Ego and rugged individualism are desirable qualities in climbers. Yet they are placed in a situation where they have to work incredibly hard together at high altitudes, pushing their bodies to the limits of human endurance. The climbing leader must have a perceptive understanding of his fellow climbers. Bill March is coordinator of the Outdoor Pursuits program at the University of Calgary. He was chosen leader of the Canadian expedition.
The philosophy was discussed. You know, I was very clear. I said that our objective was to climb the mountain, but we wanted to go as safe as possible, that we would not give up climbing the mountain unless we ran out of supplies or it was too dangerous to climb the mountain. I also said that there was a good, very high possibility of a fatality on the mountain, and if that occurred, that the expedition would continue.
There is no easy way up Everest. The Canadian expedition was determined to tackle one of the last major technical challenges on the mountain, the untried South Pillar route. For the first part of the climb, they would follow the route of previous expeditions. After establishing base camp at 17,400 feet, the first major challenge would be to fix a route through the treacherous Khumbu icefall. Camp 1 would be at the bottom of the western Khum at 19,600 feet. Camp 2 would be pitched near the top of the Khum at 21,300 feet. Camp 3 would be only 2,200 feet higher up, but here the effects of altitude would begin to impair the climbers. Camp 4 would be sited near the Geneva Spur at 25,600 feet. From here, the Canadians planned to tackle the South Pillar. Peter Spear, assistant vice principal at Queen Elizabeth School in Calgary, was appointed base camp manager.
The food itself took 6 weeks to put together because we were dealing with 10 tons of food and 6 tons of equipment. So by the 13th of April, when the Air Canada cargo plane arrived in Calgary, we had that 16 tons all packed up at the airport and ready to go. Material got into base camp. Remember, the Air Canada cargo plane flew Calgary, Toronto, Prestwick, India. It was trucked to Nepal. And in late April, we got 10 twin otter loads flown into an airstrip called Lhotse, which is very close to Namche Bazaar. The material that wasn't flown in by plane was taken in by porters. It's, in that stage, about 100 miles across 5 mountain ranges, and all the mountain ranges are about as high as the mountains are around Banff. So it was quite a horrendous task.
Then, on July 17th, 1982, the Canadian Everest team left Canada for Kathmandu, and the first step towards their great adventure, 12,000 miles from home. Kathmandu lies 250 kilometers to the southwest of Mount Everest. It's a bustling city, particularly during the Kumari festival, a celebration to the living goddess Kumari. Television pictures would be broadcast live via satellite from Nepal for the first time. The progress of the Canadian Everest team would be transmitted to Canada. The climbers themselves would be operating the video and still cameras that would tell their story to the world. The team boarded buses bound for the village of Lamasangu. From there, they would begin a 3-week trek to base camp at the foot of the mountain. The mountaineers and porters would climb up 30,000 feet and down another 20,000 on their way to base camp, altitude 17,400 feet, higher than any of the peaks in the Canadian Rockies. The trek-in is vital to the physical and mental preparation of the climbers and acclimatization period. It's a time to get in touch with the land and its people.
Well, the walk-in was really an enjoyable time. You know, we had a good time. The lads were relaxed. It was important from the point of view of physical conditioning, but also important from the point of view of getting to know one another. And I really felt that there was good progress made in terms of people getting on with each other. Everyone seemed to make an effort to converse with different people, share with different people, and generally have a good time.
The walk-in was, to me, the most rewarding part of Nepal experience, the Himalayan experience, meeting the people that actually lived in the mountains. They're true mountain people. They weren't just visitors. And it was thrilling to be walking over a 10,000-foot pass and dropping down into a village that was clinging to the mountainside, and being welcomed in as though your neighbors or your relatives or something.
In many ways, walking in during the monsoon is a sordid affair. There's leeches and mud, and it's wet and misty. But for some strange reason, both times I've done that, I've really, really enjoyed the walk. And I don't mind the leeches, and the mist actually makes the place sort of more mysterious, sort of magical. And so both of those walk-in were really almost a highlight, sort of a lower highlight of the expedition.
If we had a nation of Sherpas, then like 25 million Canadians were Sherpas. There's no doubt we would be one of the greatest nations in the world. They are a fantastic people. They have a simple and hard life. They have a deep religious belief which is rooted in their affinity to the mountains and the work they do in the mountains and the frequent tragedies that they face in the mountains. Lhotse Monastery, which is the central monastery in the Khumbu, all the expedition members and the Sherpas went through a special ceremony, a blessing from the head Lama to protect them from the god on the mountain, Chomolungma. The ceremony was an incredible mixture of pagan ritual and prayer.
We received the blessing of the Lama at 150 rupees a head. And so we kind of bought our way into heaven or something. When we were at the monastery, they issued a good luck charm, which is simply a thread tied in knots.
It was a time for tranquility, a time for immersion in a land and her people. But ultimately, it was a time to prepare for the mountain beyond. Base camp is the heart of the entire Everest operation. But always there is the fear of what lies just beyond the treacherous Khumbu icefall, creaking and groaning, constantly shifting. The Canadian plan was to lay siege to the mountain. Base camp would supply the series of camps higher up. Peter Spear was base camp manager.
Base camp was home, or home away from home. First of all, the climate was quite mild in comparison to conditions in other parts of the mountains. Our morning air temperatures at base camp would be somewhere between -10 and -15 degrees Celsius, so it was cool. But as soon as the sun came up, that temperature would rise 10 or 15 degrees Celsius within an hour. Likewise, at night, it would cool down that fast as well. On mornings when we were down around -15 Celsius on the upper part of the mountain, it was -40 Celsius. So it was, in fact, a warmer place to be. Of course, we had larger tents where people could move around easier. We had more staff there in terms of the Sherpa cooks to prepare meals. We had food boxes to sit on instead of having to lie in your tent. So it had that appeal.
Peter Spear was also keeper of the base camp expedition diary. Excerpts from this journal, as well as the actual radio transmissions and climber comments, will take us up the mountain. The pictures you are seeing in this program were shot by the climbers themselves on videotape and film. This is their story. Then it was on to what everyone had been concerned about for 2 years, the Khumbu icefall.
My first impression on seeing the Khumbu icefall was one of sheer horror. The small blocks of ice were actually the size of large houses. It was over 2,000 feet high and involved more than a mile of climbing in order to reach Camp 1.
The icefall, it's really a chaotic, tumbling mass of great blocks of ice, constantly changing and moving. It's not visible. You only notice it from day to day when a crevasse is a little wider, or a ladder has collapsed, or a rope is stretched and broken, a new crevasse has opened or a crevasse is closed, or a serac has fallen down and there's lumps of ice across the trail where we've been walking up. You really have 3 stages in the operation. You first of all find your route up, the best route, for example, through the icefall. You then fix that route, fix ladders across every crevasse, put a rope the whole way up as a handrail and a support and security for the climbers and the Sherpas carrying loads. And then the third thing is that you then carry your loads of equipment up the mountain, and they're the 3 stages.
This area is moving all the time. It moves at an average speed of about a foot a day, but it doesn't move consistently at an average at a foot a day. Sometimes the friction builds up over 10 days, and all of a sudden a major surge will take place, and the ice will leap forward 10 feet in 1 second. And it's then that the major tragedies occur, because when that happens, it's cataclysmic. Everything falls, everything collapses, crevasses open up and collapse, ice towers. And we had to build a route through that icefall that we could go through heavily laden, that we could carry 30 or 40-pound loads through on a day-by-day basis, and that the Sherpas could carry through as well. And to do that, we had to fix ropes from one end to the other, and we had to put ladder bridges across some of the major crevasses. And then from that point onwards every day, we had to keep on repairing the route, because every day it would change. We'd notice cracks appearing where there was no cracks. We'd notice collapses of seracs where there were no collapses before.
It is obviously a dangerous place. It's the sort of thing that if you were confronted with that kind of terrain in the Rockies, you would find a way around it. You would never consider going right through it. So it's an unusual hazard in that respect. You just know that it's a part of climbing Mount Everest that you have to do something like that and find a way through it, and that's what we spent 2 weeks doing.
If you have to be in the icefall for a long time, I found that I stopped worrying about the danger. There was no way I could spend 6 hours in the icefall and have every moment full of anxiety. So what I did, and what I think everyone else did, is once you set off in the morning and you decided that you were going to go through the icefall, you just switched off your worry kind of switch. And that meant that you could be in very, very dangerous places without being scared.
Expedition Diary, August 23rd. We headed up to actually start moving loads and setting up Camp 1 at 19,600 feet. When we reached the Camp 1 site, it was really quite spectacular, pinched in between the west face of Everest and Lhotse. August 29th, we set up 5 tents and left Bill, Tim, Dave, and Al to push on to Camp 2. Peter Spear writes in the diary of August 31st. Rusty was about 30 meters behind me and had stopped to put some gear into his pack. Just seconds later, there was a tremendous roar of an avalanche breaking off on the valley above us on the west shoulder.
I tried to duck down behind my pack, but I was picked up like a leaf in the wind and hurled I don't know how far until the stretch went onto the climbing rope as I was still secured to it, thumped down to the ground, and the entire avalanche poured over me. The procedure was very, very scary, just trying to think of one's every move and how I could preserve my life. Then I heard Rusty coming. He had been buried up to his waist, I understand, and off to the side of the slide, and he and Angrita saw my foot, came over, started digging me out.
Eventually, in quite a short time, we established there were 3 Sherpas missing. Jim eventually found a load. Then we dug around the load and he found a Sherpa. And it was really sad, you know. We all went down and there was a very strong feeling of just sadness that the Sherpas had died. Managed to dig out the one Sherpa, Pasang Sona. And I went down the valley to Lhotse with Steve Bezruska, the doctor, and some Sherpas to carry the body. We'd already sent for the Lama, who came up and prayed all night at the body, and the next morning the wife came up, Pasang Sona's wife, and she just clung to me and cried. We went down in the morning the next day and we cremated Pasang Sona. I went back to Lhotse with Steve. I hadn't been there very long when I got a message handed to me by a Sherpa from base camp. And it was a very short note. It just said from Peter Spear that Blair Griffith had been killed by a falling serac.
About 8:30 in the morning, I was at the bottom of the ladder and the ground started to shudder, shake, buck and twist, similar to the films I've seen of the San Francisco earthquake, with the ground starting to go in this manner. Without no warning, the whole section of about maybe 250 yards just dropped beneath us. The Sherpa and myself were cast into the crevasse through blocks of ice whizzing past our heads. We were sucked in a manner of sugary snow down into the depths of the crevasse. After what seemed an age, but it's probably only a few seconds, we came to a stop underneath two ice blocks that just went boomf. And as they went together in that shape, the Sherpa and I finished up underneath. If they hadn't have cantilevered together, if one had gone like that and one had gone like that, that would have been it. So there was the Sherpa and myself in this small cavity. My right arm was buried underneath myself. I was buried up to my shoulders, but my left arm was free. The first thing I noticed just here on my right was a hat with a pair of glasses round the top of the hat. So with this hand I moved away the snow from the hat, and there was a face underneath, but the face wasn't moving. So with my forearm I put it underneath the guy's chin and lifted up. And as I lifted up, his face came out of the snow and went, "Bruh!" And all this snow came out, but he came back to life. About maybe 20 feet towards the surface was a small hole, and Rusty Bailey's face appeared at that small window, and the first words he said was, "My God, you're alive!" I says to Rusty, "How's Blair?" He says, "I'm sorry, Dave, lad, Blair's dead."
And I said, "I think we should leave Blair where he is. I didn't want to have anyone in that icefall, you know. I thought it was too dangerous." And that really upset the team, you know. I'm sure it did, or some of the team, not all the team. They really felt they wanted to go and bring Blair's body down. I didn't want them to do it. I just didn't want to take the chance of having anyone else killed. You know, what, in 3 days, 4 people. I had the feeling that if I'd have said, leave the body there, that the guys would have gone ahead and brought him down anyway. And I didn't want to have a confrontation. I didn't want to have a straight disobedience to my decision, because I knew the expedition had to continue, and it couldn't continue if that happened. They went up, brought the body down, came down to Lhotse, and as the guys came in, you could see the air of defeat among some of the men, you know, that they'd given their shot, and I realised that it wasn't a time for me to say, right, let's go back up the mountain. It was a time for me to ask each man to really reconsider where he was as an individual in his commitment to climb the mountain. I really felt that I shouldn't influence that decision, I shouldn't lobby, because I didn't want to be responsible if they were killed later. You know, I really felt that we had our backs to the wall in a real hard place, and each man had to speak for himself. I did say that when you've made your decision, you live with it, because that's something you have to do.
Rusty Bailey, a professor of outdoor pursuits at the University of Calgary, a veteran mountain climber, he is writing his doctoral thesis on stress.
I started to look at the mountain just as another mountain. The fact that it was Mount Everest ceased to be important to me, and I looked at the problem purely as a mountain climbing problem. I didn't see any way that I could justify in my mind, say, doing another 100 man-days work in the icefall. Those guys who just had a very, very strong commitment, they felt like staying. And those of us that had any kind of reservations at all, you know, we just left.
Dwayne Congdon, a mountaineering instructor from Invermere, BC, ice climbing expert and youngest member of the expedition.
I went back to base camp after we cremated Blair's body, got packed up, sent my gear out, and then this little quirk of fate happened, and I heard that my girlfriend, Colleen, was in Kathmandu, and I made arrangements to talk to her the next day. Well, what that did was that kept me at base camp a bit longer, whereas the other people that were leaving went ahead and went to Kathmandu. While I was waiting for the radio call to Colleen, I spent some time with some of the guys that had committed to staying behind and to at least try to pull the expedition together. I talked to them, got some of their feelings, and it just began to well up in me that I still wanted to climb Mount Everest, or try to climb Mount Everest, and be a part of this experience.
My own feeling was I'd been through so much emotional turmoil that I was looking at everything very objectively, very pragmatically, very practically, you know. There wasn't any room for emotion on this mountain. Not when it just kills men just like that, you know. You just got to have your shit together, look at it as a really difficult problem, and deal with it in a very cold and calculated manner. Otherwise, well, we didn't have a hope in hell of climbing that mountain.
Tim Odger, a park ranger from Canmore, Alberta. He coordinated the avalanche rescue in the Khumbu icefall.
I do think it's unfortunate that at the time of the accidents, we made up our minds as quickly as we did. I'm sure that in the case of some of the other fellows that they may have come to another decision if they hadn't moved so quickly, and if the atmosphere hadn't been to make up your mind so quickly. And I learned at one point that there was a sense in camp that if you were considering leaving or were going to leave, that it was best that you leave fairly quickly so that you somehow didn't draw other people with you. I think that the climbing instinct would have returned in more people. It's clear that the mountain, you could continue on the mountain without further hazard.
I guess each one of us that came here set our own limits, maybe unconsciously before we even arrived here in Nepal, as to how much we'd take before we decided the mountain wasn't worth it. And the accidents were really tragic. It was terrible about Blair. And some of the members, I think, found that that was the limit for them, and that's fair enough. I found myself quite puzzled. I helped carry down the body of the Sherpa that we could retrieve, and was there when we retrieved Blair. And I kept wondering if there's something wrong with me, but I felt I still had a lot left inside me. And I think Dave Reed said it quite clearly yesterday. You know, we've got all this equipment here. You know, we've taken all this time, all these years to plan and put this expedition together. And it's terrible that 4 people have died up to this point. But inside, I still feel like I've got a lot yet to give, and I think our chances are reasonable, especially with the route that we've chosen now, the South Col route. And that's why I stayed, because I feel we still have a chance, and I still feel I've got a lot of energy left inside me for this. And I certainly don't disregard the loss of life, not at all. But I really think it would be such a waste if we turned around and left now without giving it another try. And that's why I'm staying.
Diary, September the 6th. When the departing climbers left camp, it was snowing, misty, and very, very cool.
One must respect those men in making a very difficult decision, personal decision, to leave at this time. All the climbers that have left have made a considerable contribution to the climb. We have 120 loads above the icefall, and I think we have a chance with a smaller team, and that chance has depended on their work and effort as well. And I think that there's no hard feelings, as far as I'm concerned, in seeing them go down the mountain.
Expedition Diary, September 7th. Another continuous day of talk. Most of the remaining members agreed that they were going to climb Mount Everest.
Each climber brought a very special contribution that was unique and necessary to the expedition. Whether it be, you know, the real honest integrity of Alan, or the real steely commitment of Lloyd Gallagher, or the very quiet but the quiet but powerfully strong determination of Dwayne Congdon. Of course, Dave Reed, who was irrepressible, and Speedy, who was so solid and workmanlike and plodded on from day to day. Pat, who was quiet but always listening, and when he always spoke wisely. And of course, Laurie, he would always raise everyone's spirits by he's just such an incredible, lively character.
Everybody feels very positive about going ahead, especially since the climbers decided they were going to go up the South Col route instead of the South Pillar.
There was no real choice in changing the route from the South Pillar to the South Col. We'd lost 6 really strong climbers. If we'd have wanted to continue with we just didn't have the climbing strength to continue, I think, with the South Pillar. Plus, it would have meant a lot more carries through the icefall, which no one was prepared to undertake. And therefore, it was really the best mountaineering decision we could make.
John Ament headed back to Kathmandu to explain why the members had left the expedition, why we've changed our route, and what our future plans are.
Is in Kathmandu, Nepal.
That was a time of intense emotional stress, as you can imagine. The avalanche that killed the 3 Sherpas, and 2 days later the Sarak collapse that killed Blair Griffiths. And because we were having difficulty communicating with Kathmandu, and therefore communicating back to Canada, I was really worried about how our supporters were perceiving our actions and the unfolding events on the mountain.
Almost half of their climbing team.
The group of us that were left had to make some very important decisions, and of course we had our moments in the decision-making process where we were angry and excited and going through all the normal range of human emotions. But when we got the whole group together, the 11 of us that were left, as we call ourselves, the survivors, we drew on each other's strengths and weaknesses. Everybody contributed in one way or the other to the group solidarity. We knew we could depend on each other because, being a very small group now, we were literally riding on each other's shoulders.
Spending time at base camp was a good thing for me because it let me know that the decision that I made still made sense. It just helped me feel comfortable with continuing, and I knew that it was okay.
September 16th. Al, Speedy, and Pat took off early this morning for Camp 1. We had not been up on the mountain for almost 2 weeks because of the bad weather. There were many repair jobs to do on the icefall route, and the guys even had to do some fishing with ice axes tied on ropes to bring the ladders back up to the surface.
after the accidents when I went through the icefall, those 3 times, each time it got harder, you know, because you walk past the place where Blair was killed and where the Sherpas are buried, and that, you know, brought home to you. You know, we marked the avalanche site with prayer flags where the Sherpas were buried. And going past that each day was like a memory rekindled.
September 17th. Today, Duane moved up to Camp 1 to stay, and Bill went up carrying a load and stayed. 11 Sherpas came back down, so Camp 1 is getting 10 Sherpas well established with extra gear to add to the total which we accumulated before the 1st of September. In the western Coombe, the rest of the crew almost pushed to Camp 2, so we're making good progress up the Coombe.
Seems to me that the expedition is now on the move. Alan Burgess will make a carry with 9 Sherpas from Camp 1 to Camp 2. The route set by avalanche troughs. We're just keeping our fingers crossed that we're going to get good weather.
Once we had made it through the icefall and had stalked Camp 2 from the supply dump at 1, we were right at the top end of the western Coombe, where the gentle pitch of the Coombe steepened up suddenly into the 5,000 vertical foot slope of the Lhotse face.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Alan. Happy birthday to you.
Basically, the plan was to move everything up to Camp 2. That was the advanced base camp. And once we had achieved that, and we had our members and equipment and Sherpas at Camp 2, it was decided that we would close the icefall. In fact, it was when the icefall was closed that Laurie Skresler made a decision to come up through the icefall himself, since he'd been down below recuperating with some strained ribs.
The reason we're closing the icefall, Peter, is because we feel the objective danger is too high. I repeat, the objective danger is too high. If Laurie wishes to go through the icefall, it is his personal responsibility and his personal decision.
September 26th and 27th. Al Burgess reached the site of Camp 3 with fixed ropes, and behind him were 4 Sherpas carrying other loads. So Camp 3 has been established at 23,500 feet. More loads were carried up, so the Lhotse face is being fixed, and people are getting ready to stay in Camp 3.
Why is the team moving so well, so quickly? Over.
It's really a combination of teamwork, of the Sherpas and the Saabs, using oxygen intelligently, and Alan Burgess put a lot of rope out from the Camp 3 and right across the Corwar to the yellow band. You know, the team is highly motivated and really working hard.
Diary, September 30th. It was a successful day on the mountain today as the rope was fixed over 25,500 feet, taking the climbers through the yellow band and onwards over the Geneva Spur towards the South Col.
And it was funny because this was supposed to be the tourist route, you know, the easy way. And I was front pointing on this really hard ice. To put an ice screw in, it took all my strength, using the ice axe as a lever. was really, really difficult. And you had an oxygen mask on, and the wind was blowing, and you couldn't see your feet. And you thought, well, gee, you know, Sir Edmund Hillary in those days, he was really good in 53.
The climbers are discussing now who's going to the summit and when the attempt will take place. So maybe my guess on reaching the summit on the 5th of October will hold true. Diary, October 4th. Lori, Sungdari, and Lakpa Dorji went to the South Col to set up Camp 4. 11 other Sherpas helped carry the necessary supplies to establish the camp. Things were going well, but there were still some anxious moments. At 6 p.m., Dave made it to the South Col, but Lloyd had trouble with his oxygen and turned back towards Camp 3 by himself. His radio wasn't working, so we had no idea where he was.
Lloyd calling base. I've been trying to get you for the last hour. I'm just on the way down to Camp 3.
Okay, Lloyd, how are you? Over?
Just getting a little tired now as I'm just taking it easy. Over.
Thank God, I've been really worried about you, you bugger.
Four men are now in position to go for the summit of Mount Everest. Laurie Skreslet, Dave Reed, and the two Sherpas.
We were in the tent, and Laurie said, "We've only got enough oxygen for one of us." And it was obvious to me that Laurie was in the best condition. So at 2 a.m. I fed him tea and got him ready.
Set off at 4, slightly after 4 o'clock. The first 10 minutes were a bit stop and go while we organized the rope and redid the tubes from our oxygen sets because they were getting in the way and everything. And then we started up ice, bare, smooth, green ice. Climbed ice for about 50 minutes. But the pace the Sherpas were setting was really fast. I had to stop a couple of times to tell Sundari that I couldn't keep up. He told me to crank up the oxygen a bit more. I was afraid I would run out before we reached the summit. He got back down again. He said not to worry, he'd look out for me, which he did. We continued up, and the wind started blowing, and the sun was rising over Tibet. It was beautiful. You could see forever. You could see as far as the earth curved. We continued till we got to the slopes leading up to the top of the south summit. And from there I could see the Hillary step and see the main summit. Sundari was the first on top, lifted his axe above his head, let out a shout.
Fantastic!
I don't know how to put it. You know, you can see the peaks sticking up through the clouds there, and if you want to go to the top of that mountain, the price is great. You know, and for some people it's not justifiable, but for me it is. And I think for the people that stayed it was. You know, they were willing to pay that price. And it's funny, where Blair was killed in the icefall, I don't think I know a member on the expedition that didn't work on that bridge. You know, I spent 4 hours on that bridge where Blair was killed. You know, we all were in that particular place at one time or another when we were fixing the icefall. We all took the chances. You know, when I was standing working on parts of the icefall and the glacier would shift, and I'd think, you know, this is dangerous. But I thought, well, if I don't do it, someone else is going to have to do it. So is that fair? If I leave, that someone else has to do the job that I was assigned to stay? No. So you do your job, and you hope for the best. And if this isn't the kind of game you want to play, if the satisfaction isn't great enough for you, isn't deep enough for you, you shouldn't be here. It's not the place for you.
Expedition Diary, October 7. On the upper mountain, Pat, Pema Dorji, Lakpa Sering, and Al Burgess left Camp 4 at 4:30 a.m. However, Al's oxygen regulator froze. Rather than take a Sherpa's oxygen set, Al wished the group good luck and descended to the South Col. He called to inform us of his problems. We all wept.
And we get to the crux of the climb, which is the Hillary Step, which is about a 25, 30-foot vertical section of rock and snow, which is it's just thrown in as the final kind of hurdle, and it was just a nice little test piece for us to do before actually, you know, plodding up that last little ramp leading to the summit. And when we got to that point, I brought the Sherpas up to me, and we wrapped our arms around each other and just kind of stumbled onto this narrow, narrow summit wedge. And I mean, we were all, you know, just incredulous. Couldn't believe we were there.
The report is as follows. On October 7th, Patrick Morrow, Lhotse City, and Pemba Dorji achieved the summit of Mount Everest.
We did it! We did it! You got another? Okay. All right. Wow. 4 Sherpas and 2 Canadians to the summit.
Oh, here right now!
Did it, they did it.
Diary, October 8th. By 11:30, everyone was off the icefall, so the climb is finished. There was a lot of fluid and tears to greet them in base camp. The triumphs and tragedies of those weeks on the mountain would have a lasting effect on the men who were there. In the months that followed, they would reflect a great deal on the deeper meanings of the experience they had shared.
I think on a personal basis, you know, when one looks at what does one want to go back to Everest again, each man has his own Everest. I really felt that on this expedition. To some it was the South Col, to some the Yellow Band, to some it was the icefall. I think that for myself, Everest came at a crucial time in my life. That it came at a time when I needed a great challenge. I needed to explore myself, and I didn't find myself wanting as a man, and I don't need to explore that direction or depth again. I feel there are other areas and aspects of my personality and character that I want to explore as an individual. So I think in some ways it is a crossroads in my life.
I think that just being on the mountain for that length of time, coping with the hardships, coping with the emotional trauma, learning how to work so closely with people, you know, as a team, being very close to people in situations that normally would maybe be hard on your relationships and make people irritable and things like that. Everyone working together really made me feel optimistic about people's ability to work together toward a common goal. And I think that, as much as anything, probably changed my outlook on human potential.
I spend a lot of my time climbing, and climbing is part of my life. And Everest is just one of the things that I've tried to do. And the whole Everest experience, as painful as it was, doesn't really basically affect how I feel about the mountains and how I feel about climbing. If ever I went back to Everest, it would definitely not be through the icefall. I simply think that that is not a proper mountaineering route. And I would never try that kind of route on any mountain. But I would be quite interested in going back to a safer part of Everest and trying to climb it.
The whole experience of this expedition added a great deal of stuff to my life experiences. a lot of emotions and challenges that I never had to deal with before. I had been through them. Things like having people get killed. For me, I'd never had to face that in any way. Never had to face people getting killed, even out of mountaineering situations. So that was one of the major things that I learned. And then I learned a lot about myself in terms of commitment to a goal, and what is commitment and for myself, and how I can follow that commitment through to a point, a successful or negative point.
I think that this expedition was remarkable in many ways. It was remarkable because after having been devastated with 2 major accidents early on in the climb, before we'd really even set foot on the mountain itself to some extent, because the icefall is just the doorstep of the climb of Everest. After having been devastated by those accidents, a small group of remarkable men was able to pull it back together again and to go on up the mountain and literally close the door behind them, because they closed down the icefall for 3 weeks after they had gone through it, because it was so dangerous. So they were operating on the upper part of the mountain for 3 weeks with their retreat route effectively cut off. And I think it took incredible courage for them to do that. I think it took incredible strength for them to be able to climb the mountain the way they did, going from 21 to 29,000 feet in 2 days and then back down again the same day. These, I think, are all highlights of an expedition like this, and I think they will go down in the annals of Himalayan mountaineering as a major accomplishment. And I think it's something that Canadians should be proud of, that these men did achieve this in very difficult and very dangerous circumstances.
Bill March, Professor of Physical Education. Lloyd Gallagher, Mountain Rescue Specialist. Laurie Skreslet, Mountain Guide. Pat Morrow, Photographer. Alan Burgess, Professional Mountaineer. Dwayne Congdon, Mountaineering Instructor. Dave Reed, Millwright. Gordon Smith, Engineer. Lakpa Tsering. Pema Dorji. Lakpa Dorji. Sungdari, 3 times to the summit. John Ament, Management Consultant. Peter Spear, Teacher. Steve Besrushka, Doctor. Peter Spear writes in the Expedition Diary, October the 12th, I quickly descended to Dougla, to the site of Blair's cairn. I recalled Tim Odger's verse for Blair's ceremony. This is the way of all eternity. As we see him now, so shall we be. When the time comes to follow him to where the mountain wind blows, go as he does, with a good heart.